That's very powerful.
Thank you.
I agree. And that's why I think the conversation is important, Mayor. But yeah, when the leadership at the top, uh, sometimes the words are very powerful and they set the tone for how others will react. And then I was reading that they arrested a news reporter or something to that effect for trying to report the news. So um, yeah, we have some serious challenges, and I agree. We need to work on them, and we need to invest in training, and de-escalation, uh, implicit bias, all the things that you said. I agree.
And it needs to be mandatory too. And because most of the things we've talked about, Paul, AJ, you and I, we've talked about this. This kind of thing will maybe you do it if you want to, or don't do it if you want to. I mean, mandatory. When you entrust people with the kind of power and deference that you do law enforcement, there should be a higher level of standard in terms of making sure you know who you're giving that power to. And if you're not willing to take that kind of scrutiny, then maybe you shouldn't be in that profession. Surgeons have a certain level of scrutiny. Pilots have a certain level of scrutiny. You can't drink while you are getting ready to get on a plane. They check things. They make sure that there are certain precautions that they take to make sure that you are worthy to be in that position. And we don't do that with our officers. The other thing is we don't do mental health checks with our officers. Our officers can have challenges themselves, and we know that hurt people. And so we need to have a checkup from the neck up for our officers as well on a regular basis to make sure that they are emotionally and mentally stable enough to handle what they're dealing with. Because there is post-traumatic stress. There is what we call internalized trauma that they experience through seeing what they see on a regular basis. So they internalize the trauma. And of course, they become fatigued in terms of their compassion as it relates to the perpetuation of trauma that they go through. And when you lose your compassion, then you will do things that does not seem to be congruent with being human.
Yeah, I agree, and I think we have to have uh, good police officers who are courageous enough to be able to step in when they see something not right. I mean, swiftly step in. That takes a lot of courage. We need to
Well, it
have
shouldn't take courage. That's the problem. It shouldn't take courage.
it shouldn't, but I mean, that's where
Right.
we are today. So, I mean, they have to know that it's okay to step in. And some of them, again, they have to build that courage to just get themselves out of that shock and awe moment where they're just looking and intervene.
Well, maybe if we were to create a situation where you become culpable, if you see something wrong and do nothing, then there needs to be culpability for all people, because there are sins of, as you know, Paul, there's sins of commission, but there are also sins of omission.
Mm-hmm.
And we hold citizens to that same standard. If you are somewhere and you see a crime and you don't report the crime, or if you have the capacity to stop the crime and you don't, then you are charged for that. And I think we need to have the same kind of standards established for law enforcement as well.
Mr. Mayor, I think that we
likewise,
have that with our policies, procedures, in every organization, we have these policies, procedures, rules, and regulations. Those are the standards that's supposed to be the guidelines for us. I kind of like what you said earlier about this. It has the potential of becoming an activity and futility. And I think you're right. I think you're right, because all along our careers, there are critical inflection points that, we have to deal with. But I think a lot of our folks, just meaning law enforcement officers, have decided to save their skin and sacrifice their soul for political expediency. And so I make the distinction, of course, we have some people, number 45 is in a position of leadership. But my definition of power is the ability to cause or prevent change. And if you can accept that definition of power, to cause or prevent change, then each and every one of us have the ability to cause and prevent change on our level. We may not be able to scale it, but where we are, we can do that. And so what would you suggest that an officer do when he collides with policies and procedures that's diametrically opposed to his quality of life?
Well, one thing, we have to move past being transactional and become transformational. Courage does not mean that you're unafraid. Courage means that you act appropriately in the face of fear. And you know, it's at some juncture, it's not about you. To create change, it requires courageous people or ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Let me also expand the definition of power. It's the ability to supply or withdraw needed resources. And so therefore, if we don't provide resources to these departments, get the right kind of leadership in place that understands that there needs to be a paradigm shift and a transformation of law enforcement, particularly as it relates to how it deals with the communities of color. Until we are able to do that, again, I reiterate that all of our conversations are merely an activity in futility.
Right. I agree.
Eric, Milo, thanks for being so patient. Want to bring you in. You're on mute now. Can I unmute you? Hey, brother, how you doing?
It truly, I'm actually glad that I was able to sit here and listen to everyone speak. Very powerful messages, and agreed that while they're powerful and amazing and motivating, that now action steps need to be taken to get out and reach out into the community. Just so you know quickly a little bit about who I am, I'm a retired police officer, Santa Monica Police Department. My specialty was defensive tactics while I was there, and then towards the end was really working more on communication skills, de-escalation, working on implicit bias and the like. Charles, on your with POST, I have a current POST certified class. It's called Mindful Breathing and De-Escalation that I was teaching in California. It's still on the grant right now. Unfortunately, I'm under an umbrella company called Los Angeles County Regional Training Center in California. So I'm under their umbrella. And my most recent training is I went to Huntington Beach Police Department and gave them, and I was really happy. They put their whole police department through my training. It's an 8-hour training. I do mindful breathe. I do actually 7 different breathing techniques. Since I was a de-escalation officer, I realized that there are times when we may have to use physical force, but it's being present, a present mind. So I talk about, I kind of backdoored, I go through breathing techniques while even striking, like basically like a boxer's breath. And then I talk about breathing, which was kind of labeled a combat breathing, but it's a square breathing and breath holds while maybe you're in your patrol car or waiting, and then breathing circular in and out through the nose when you're moving. And the power of the breath that I won't go down that rabbit hole too much further, but the power of it, it really does bring you into the present moment. If you're present of your breath, you're present about what's going on around you. I start that class with a conversation about love. And after teaching defensive tactics, I'll kind of put it to you as I did in one of my classes. Well, my first class I went to teach, I was trying to think of what to wear. And I had an old SWAT t-shirt on that was very clear SWAT shirt. And then I had another shirt that said, "Love is my religion," and had a heart on it. And I knew I had to go, and I was going to talk in front of cops. I was like, oh, I got this SWAT shirt, or I got this heart and this love shirt. Which am I going to wear? And I knew it would be easy to wear the SWAT one, walk in and like, hey, what's up? You know, like, and get that. But when you talk about courage, which one for me did it take more courage to wear? It was the one that said love on it.
Right.
So I put it on, man. And then that became, I wore different shirts that expressed love every time I taught a class. And I expressed to the class, like, which one do you think it took me more courage to wear today? And I talk about the courage of love. And that it is courageous to run into a building where shots are being fired and you've got to run in there, and sometimes that's our job. But the flip side of that coin, it also takes courage to open up your hearts and to be compassionate and empathetic with people. A lot of the things that you gentlemen have already been saying. So I was teaching that class. I suddenly my phone stopped ringing after Huntington Beach, and I know I'm happy to show it. And when I started out there, it was rough going. Talking to cops about love. I was getting some pushback, but it's just like you were saying, AJ, like I knew this was my walk. This is where I'm at. I'm not going to step down. That I know that love is really, even scientifically, gratitude and love are the most powerful vibrations going, man. So I knew that hey, that's where I'm standing on, and I'm standing in that place. I'm continuing to stand there. And by the end, the critiques were positive, and people were like, this is needed. This is what we need. This is, you know, we're digging this. We're loving it. And I was, it was a challenge, but every time I would leave a class, I was like, you know, I'm stepping into the right place. So I would like to continue doing those classes and you know, I don't know, Charles, if, you know, you could see my class out there. I'm willing to do that, and I'm anywhere. And at this point, I'm telling you, I'll go do a class for free. I got retirement, you know, I'm not rich, but I moved to Texas, you know, where I could afford a house. But I'm willing to go anywhere to do that, to talk about humanity and love and compassion. I just want to say another thing too. I went to Portland, Oregon for a while, was chasing my girlfriend up there after I retired. But I met a gentleman there, Sapphire Bouchillon, who happens to be an African-American gentleman in the community. And he's doing a lot of, I went there, for me, it was getting out of that box of being a police officer. They do he's a DJ, he does music, does African music, and people dance. So I was there dancing, I'm having a good time. And I end up talking to Sapphire. And, you know, it's similar to what you were talking about, Paul, like, I've never been African-American, I've never walked in those shoes. But, you know, talking to him about what he was doing, and we came up with a program that we wanted to bring to Portland Police Department. We started meeting every week, meeting and writing down what we wanted to do. And we wanted to get community and police together instead of just working in these vacuums where communities together, police are together, like to where the police and community come together and dress like, you know, like we are now in plain clothes, and actually doing some breathing techniques together, some movement together. So we're coming together in like a human environment, opposed to just coming together when there's violence, opposed to just coming together when there's negative calls. Like, you know, I mean, barbecues and those kinds of things are fantastic as well, and I promote those. Like more of these things where we are community, we talk about, you know, community policing, the community and the police are one, and then it's so seldom that that's even true. Like, when are we showing up as community and really coming together and doing things together? So it was definitely some out of the box stuff. We spent a lot of hours. He's done a lot of training. He's a well-educated man. He's done a lot of training with a lot of different people. And at this point, so have I. And we came together, and to be honest, we went to the police department and we got some pushback. They're like, what? You guys want to do what? And it's out of the box. But I feel like that's where we got to get, man, is more and more out of the box, because the shit that we've been doing that's in the box is clearly not working. And we're continually going to that spin, man, of doing stuff in the box. You know, oh, this is police training? You want to get together with people and have a good time? That's not police training. Yeah, it is. We need to learn to relate to people. I did a lot of work with at-risk youth too, in this different types of gangs and different kinds. And I got to know these kids as people. And then when they would trip up on the street, then I would see them and they'd be, hey, Milo. They called me Milo. And then I could relate to them as humans instead of like some criminal thug. You know, like, I know this kid, I know where he lives, and they knew me, and it's a different thing. So I feel like we really do need to get to know our communities. And I'm willing to put myself out there in whatever way I can. I retired, I came here, and I kind of was like, I'm done, man. I'm done with it, you know? You know, I'm a yogi, I breathe. I just want to dance and breathe now. I did the police thing. you know, and I've opened up my heart. But I watched this stuff the other night when I watched what happened with George Floyd. It just brought me to tears. Yet for George Floyd, for his family, and then it just spirals out for all the good people in law enforcement, for all the good people in the community. Like it's all the good work that's been done, and it's just like, really, this is still happening. Like, I want to start believing that it's just not going to happen, and then it does. And then you realize, like, whew. So I made a post similar to now. You know, I got emotional, and I was talking about this pain that I felt, and I just put it out there, you know, on my live feed on Facebook. And I've got a real mix of people. I got some law enforcement guys, people that follow me, and then I got some yogi types. I got this broad kind of spectrum of folks. And, you know, I want to say this one thing, and then I'll be done for now. But like, what was really interesting to me, and I didn't get it until I was talking to my daughter today, AJ. I have a daughter who's half Filipino, and we started talking about racism, and, you know, and she's talking about this and that and going back and forth. And I told her what happened, you know, and where I am at with it. And I told her, you know, I just kind of want to back up and get out of it, but and she's like, Dad, I feel like this is a good thing for you, you know, like this is a good purpose. And I said, yeah, and then I remembered, it wasn't until I talked to her, AJ, that I thought about this. And it just was interesting to me to think about. AJ popped on when I was live and emotional, and he called me. AJ calls me and is like, hey, man, brother, you all right? And AJ, thank you. Thank you for doing that, man. And then the next day I get another call, and it's from Sapphire. I mean, same thing. He's like, hey, bro, yeah, we were going to meet. He teaches me, I do drumming. I do the Jumbe drum, African drum lesson with him. I'm horrible, man. He's great. But, you know, he hit me up, and he's like, hey, you sure you want to do the lesson? Because he saw it was emotional. And I'm like, yeah, let's do it. And then I didn't even ask him how he was doing until we sat down and started to talk. Like, and then I look back on the two people that called me, a retired white cop who's having some emotion about, are two African-American dudes. It's just, I don't know what that means or what, but it's interesting to me. It's interesting to me. And I sat with them and I'm like, brother, you know, you're asking me if I'm all right. You're an African-American man going through this shit. And yet, you know, it's just these men of courage and strength, man. So, yeah, peace and blessings. I'm in it to do whatever I can, man, to win it, to help out in whatever way I can. And I think this is great to come together, and I'm excited about the possibility of getting out and doing what I can. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Hey, Charles, when we're talking about post, and I don't know the answer to this, is there post training for like the chiefs and the sheriffs, you know, that they're expected to go through? Do they have a standard that they're expected to go through that's different from just a line guy?
Yeah, here in California, you know, all of our post training is primarily legislatively mandated by law. A lot of other posts are not. We don't have the authority to fire anyone, but we have we've been given the authority to establish minimum training requirements from the recruit all the way up through chiefs of police and sheriffs. And so we have a full spectrum of curriculum that they have an opportunity. Some of that curriculum they're mandated to go through, but they have a lot of options to exercise also. So yeah, some mandated requirements and a lot of optional ones for continuing education.
You know, I've thought about this, and I don't know what the answer is, but, you know, I know, as you do, we had tons of training and what's her name on the movie called it Wuxia Training. We was talking about it the other day.
Oh, George Thompson?
Gerald.
Yeah, where guys, you know, zip in and they tell us how to be kumbaya and how we get along and this, that, and the other, and here's what we need to be doing, and then they leave, and then nothing ever changes. And the reason it never changes is because the chief didn't teach it. You know, to me, if the chief or the sheriff came in, you know, with the training and went, this is what we're going to train in. You know, this is the way we're going to operate as a department. And I'm teaching it. And if you've got questions, you can ask me. I know these guys are busy. I know that. But how do you not cut out some hours of your life during training to bring that to an academy, to bring that to your in-service. This is what we're doing, and you need to understand it. And it comes.
Paul, let me say this. Let me just interject here. Everybody is not a trainer. Just because you're a chief of police or a sheriff does not make you a trainer.
I know
right?
that. I know.
And so they can emphasize the importance of it. They can create policy within their departments that support training, but everybody's not a trainer. The other thing is, and this is some of the things I'm dealing with too, Paul, is that it was Einstein that said you cannot solve a problem at the same level of thinking that it was created. A lot of times people just don't have the knowledge or understanding or frame of reference. You know how much we love you, Paul. You're a friend of mine. I mean, we love you, right? But you ain't never been Black.
Oh,
You don't know what it's like. I can articulate it to you. I can tell you best I can, but you don't know what it's like being the person that's done all of the things that they told me to do, went to school, did everything, police officer, mayor, all of that. But when I walk out in this same t-shirt and hat, I'm just another Black dude. And that is our reality. And until we can articulate that and extract that from people, out of that system that we entrust so much authority to, until we can extract that from it, then again, we will continue to be back here with these same, kind of esoteric conversations. Yeah. Now let me say something to Charles, and I'll go back to you, Paul. You can go back. I do training now. In fact, I had to pull off because the Montgomery Police Department, I train for them as well. And what happened was the guys who had been in the department for many, many years say they didn't need training. That was the thing to the chief. Chief, we've been doing this for 20 years. Why are you going to take us through training on terms of de-escalation and implicit bias and all of that? We don't need that kind of training. We need tactical training that we get to keep certified every year. Those are the kinds of fingerprinting training. That's what we need. We don't need that other kind of training. And so you have had police chiefs that's acquiesced to that because they're trying to keep their men happy, right?
Right.
And women, right? How do you get past that and say that this is a part of your requirement to maintain your certification? Because that's, if it's not required, a lot of times people don't do it. And even when they do it, when it's required, they do it with resistance.
That's right.
I wish Fred was still on the line, Fred Herron from Bucks County, Pennsylvania, because he, excuse me, he and the DA there, Matt Weintraub, have gone so deep with the Love is the Answer training that they've even made arrangements with the local high school where Fred is, so that seniors in high school, before they graduate, they're required now to go through a training with the police, which means the police have to show up as well. Fred is making sure that all of his officers are participating in this training where they see the Walking While Black film, and they have the Love is the Answer discussions. They go deep with what does that mean about putting these things into action. And so now they've got from the top down, the DA of the county, who got a lifetime license to the film, this police chief, mandatory training within that department at a much deeper level than they had ever done before. And they didn't do it kicking and screaming. I mean, Fred came into this thing willingly and excited about it. And it's been incredibly transformative. Now they're coming back to me with stories about how they've never, ever felt so close to the community. And young people are now even gravitating towards, well, how do I become a law enforcement officer? Black kids who never even thought about that as an option. That was the last thing they wanted to do. So we gotta go deep, and we gotta make it, I don't know, people talk about making mass cool. We got to make love cool to the police community. And Milo, man, I can't even tell you how much you've done for me, just being the man you are, and not being afraid to show your emotions, and not being afraid to show the, you know, the human side of you. Just thank you, man. I just wish we could, you know, the six of us get around the country and turn it into 6,000 of us doing, you know, the kind of training that really needs to be done. I mean, tactical, you always have to have that. You always got to be on point and, you know, make sure that you're sound there. But there's a whole other half to the training that's needed that's not being addressed.
One of the things too, AJ, and to all of you on this call, is that when you know how to talk to people, when you know how to relate to people, when you know how to de-escalate situations, when you recognize that when you get to a call, it's not about you, and you reduce yourself and don't rise to the occasion, shrink to your training, right? When you are able to do that, then you have less, you have to use your tactical training less. Now, there are times that it has, you know, it just, the circumstance requires it. But don't you push the circumstance to the point of requiring it. And that's skills, that requires a certain skill set. And that skill set is not being taught as rigorously as the tactical. And I'm saying that if you teach that skill set, then you don't have to use the tactical as much.
Yeah.
And so
I think in my class, one of the things I show is the American eagle, you know, and there's arrows in one hand and there's the olive branch in the other. It's like, how much training do you get in the arrows? Well, you know, quite a bit. Well, how much training have you done with the olive branch? When they, even in policy, it started saying in Santa Monica policy that you must attempt to de-escalate when safe to do so, but they didn't give any training on de-escalate. Well, what is it? They didn't even know the definition of de-escalate.
Right, absolutely.
They don't know any tools on how to de-escalate. So I'm with you. Like, there's more and more training on, okay, so how do I do that, man? Like, you got to balance it out, but man, we need some more training in regards to how to approach people, how to connect with people. One thing I did in one of my lessons is have people sit with another person and just look into their eyes for 1 minute. And they're like, oh, that's, you know, I saw that on something. They feel, oh, that's fluffy. I'm like, you know what? You communicate with people in the worst times of their life. Maybe they just lost a loved one or they're dealing with something, and you can't sit down here for 1 minute and look into somebody's eyes and really connect and talking about that humanity piece, you know? So yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you that creating more training in regards to humanity and that olive branch and that peace and being able to come with that so you don't have to use the arrows, man, you know, like become proficient in that.
I like that, Milo. I like the way you put that, because that's true. And but that's our work we got to do. And we got to do some things differently. And AJ, that's why I love, you know, the approach of Love is the Answer, because it's going to require love. It's a song that says what the world needs now. Love, sweet love. It's the only thing there's just too little of. You know?
Yeah.
And I agree, you know? Yeah.
Hey, John.
And Milo, I think one of the answers to one of your prior questions is that we need to take a look at the politics of policing. You know, for example, that whole sense of mindful breathing is a great concept, but that was rejected in the academies because it was viewed as being too soft. It was not a manly man's approach to problem solving.
Right.
And so, you know, Eckhart Tolle, you know, he talked about the power of now. And we get so preoccupied with where we've been and where we're going to go that we can't be here, we can't breathe. And if we integrated that within our curriculum at a fundamental level, I think we could go a long way. I'll share with you, a couple of years back, I had an opportunity to teach at West Point. I helped create the LAPD West Point Leadership Program years ago. And so the generals came to LAPD, and, you know, we went out there to New York, to the academy. And the general hooked me up one day. He said, you know, Charles, something really interesting. He says, since I've been teaching on the law enforcement side, he came to a conclusion. I said, what's that, General? He called me Charles, I called him General. And so he says, you know, law enforcement is more military than the military. I said, what do you mean by that? He says, you guys are doing stuff that we stopped doing years ago because the military is evidence-based. And so I think what we have to deconstruct is the mythology that we're living in law enforcement.
Right.
And so I think we have to talk about the politics of policing. And so I think if we can for example, let's just say you were to design the cognitive scaffolding of a curriculum, I think that would be one of the modules that you should drill down into. And I think that you can get some major traction there. Remember years ago when George Thompson brought in verbal judo?
Yeah.
Right.
But it was old stuff. You know, officers who were highly engaged with the law enforcement community, they already knew the power of linguistics and oratory and words, because words are meaningful. You know, but that was old stuff, but we had to put a label on it. That was rejected because it was not sexy enough. It's like deep breathing. So I think we have to deconstruct the myths, you know, and I would ask the question, not to answer now, but if you take a look at all of law enforcement and ask the question, what are some of the myths that we need to maintain our identity and relevance? What are the myths? And I would challenge you to think about, you know, as a comparative other, why was there a need to tell us about the sanctity of Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy or King Knight and you know, all of his knights of armor around the table? I mean, and those were enduring myths that gave us meaning in life. You know, so
Charles, you saying Santa Claus was a myth? You telling me that? Messed up my Christmas, man.
But we need to challenge those myths, right? So that we can get to something novel, something new that's always been there before. It's like the elephant in the room. You know, you and I, as African-American men, we know the elephant in the room. The elephant, my audiences have always been Caucasian, my audiences. And you know, you had to put and as mayor, yours might have been also in terms of the decision makers. How did you navigate the ambiguity of all of that discordant conversation when you walked into the room, nobody, unless they knew you were the mayor, no one was going to see you as the boss or as the man. I kind of don't like the term boss because it comes from a Latin term, which means master. You know, we're not good with calling people master. And so I have a tendency not to call people boss. Right. But when we show up, there's already always knowing that some people have about us that we actually have to learn how to navigate. It's like being multicultural, multilingual.
Yeah,
and so
I think, you know, it's interesting, Charles. I think that what we have to do is we have to define what is effective policing, right? I think that's, you know, because you can literally be policing and not being effective policing.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So I think we need to come up with some kind of measurement as to what is effective policing, and then how do you get to that space, right? The other thing is, I believe that how you frame the issue determines who embrace the cause. Yes. And so we need to spend more time framing the issue where people understand the benefit to all police officers, including the community. So there is a benefit of good policing to not just the community, but also to the safety and well-being of the police officer, right? And I think that conversation needs to take place. That we're trying to get you home to your family. Now, this is how you can best do that, right? This kind of machoism, that kind of thing does not get you home to your family, right? It can escalate situations where not only if you can escape that moment, but if they see you out later when you don't have your uniform on, they still know who you are, right? Then you place yourself and your family in jeopardy as well. And so I think it's
what we have right now. We have scientific analytics and the algorithmics they're already framing the narrative, and that's how we came up with that whole concept of hot spotting, CompStat, fast track. You know, these and now we're talking about the ethics of AI. Artificial intelligence, you know, and artificial intelligence can't have any ethics because it has no morals. But what we're allowing other people to frame the narrative for us, which means that the institutional knowledge and wisdom that you have is persona non grata. And so the key is that how do you actually reimagine yourself to be able to offer a cogent conversation in the whole dialogue?
Well, this equilibrium allows for growth.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Yes, and so it takes inflection moments like this, you know, that cause for us to reevaluate. You know, what happens is that we revert back to that's comfortable to us, or that's familiar to us, and so what I'm suggesting is that we have to change the culture of law enforcement and policing, and then create a apparatus or mechanism by which that culture is sustained, and so it does not revert back to kind of some default space of machoism.
You know, Omar, going back to you know, what you said about measuring the way you do policing, right? If Officer Chauvin and the other three had acted with love-based policing, with those love is the answer principles, if they had shown up and learned about the situation, you know, they were called for someone being suspected of trying to pass a counterfeit $20 bill, right? So they learned about that on the call. They showed up, they learned some more, which is what you're supposed to do, and they did that. The next step would have been to open their heart to the needs of the community and the people in it. So did they at any point open their heart to the possibility that, you know, maybe this man wasn't committing a capital offense when they were supposed to volunteer themselves to be part of the solution in someone's life? Did they think about that for the 7, 8, 9 minutes that George Floyd had a knee on his neck, collapsing his airway, and 2 other people restraining him, and a 4th person standing there with his hands in his pockets because there was no threat?
I mean, the guy who had
let me finish. So, at what point in those 7, 8, 9 minutes did they think about, should I render aid? Should I volunteer myself to be part of the solution in this man's life? And the 4th letter, I mean, we can't even get to that, the empower others, because there was no good example for anyone to see. That's why the city's on fire. They could have done what they should have done, which was take the $20 bill, take the man's name, give him a citation, and be about their way, period. That's it, full stop.
Right.
But a man died on Monday because of a lack of love.
Right. And I was just going to add in there that they had people begging, pleading for the man's life, AJ, to which they just completely ignored. So it was not that they were not conscious of it, because they had people telling them, begging them, please, this man is, you're killing him. And they ignored it. So it's indifference to life, particularly that man's life. It's indifference to his humanity. And I think that is at the core of what it is we're talking about. And it may have something to do, as Charles said, with the kind of training and the kind of desensitivity that emanates from training in the police, as a police officer, where you become so hardcore that you lose that empathy gene, or that ability to see that person other than a criminal or something that you can feel justified in destroying.
Yeah. John,
one thing when I talk about love, when I talked about love in my course, I would tell them I would give them a couple of rules, and then I would say I have one request, and I request that you believe in the possibility of loving each other, including yourselves. And I would say that in the beginning of the class, and without fail, there'd be at least one joker or whatever, put his arm around his buddy, and I love you. And I just waited for that to happen. And then once that happened, then I would hit him with, and the reason I'm saying that is because for the last 3 years, the #1 killer of police officers is suicide. And last year it was up 29%.
Right.
So, you know, do you feel like those officers, did they love themselves? Did they feel loved by those around them? And then once I said that, then typically you could hear a pin drop, and, you know, and people would like, okay, it just got real. And then, you know, if these folks are not loving themselves and do not feel loved by the guys that are next to them in their car, then to ask them to go out and love people in the streets is a whole nother level. So I feel like, you know, they got to start loving each other and be okay to say, hey, brother, I love you in work, in the locker room, wherever, like that, changing that environment to where love, you're talking about love, you're coming into a police, it's just out of the box. So changing that environment to where it's okay to love, it's okay to show love, it's okay to talk about love, it's okay to say, hey man, I love you, man, I got your back. Now let's go out and love the community. That's like the next step outside of the, you know, this core. If they're not even loving themselves and they're killing themselves, like I feel like, you know, we've got like working out and branching out. And one of the exercises that I did that I got through this anyway is talking about the circular love and how sitting there in thought and how broad can I love my, who do I love? Oh, I love my uncle, I love my aunt, I love my mom, I love my dad. And then I love my uncle, and keep spreading that out to how big of a circle can you create of love around you to where you feel like you can send out that love. So I'm all about with what you're talking about, AJ, and then like, how do we implement that and put that into being, you know? And I'm the more that I know we've known each other for a while, and I feel that, you know, I'm in this right place with you because we're right online. That how to start implementing it and making it okay and changing the environment of law enforcement. Charles, you talked about that too, even like the verbiage that we use. And I, you know, in a lot of the old documents, if you will, it says peace officers in there. It says peace officers.
Yeah, it does say that. Yeah.
You know, like but we don't say that to each other. And I tell people, what do you do? I'm a peace officer. Oh, what's that? Like the community police officers know that's in there, but like speaking on that, coming to keep the peace and being part of the peace and maintaining peace even gives me a different place. I'm a peace officer instead of a law enforcement, you know?
Mm-hmm.
AJ, I have a question.
Go ahead, Charles.
AJ, I got a question. How do you, and I think all of us can identify with this one, but how do you leverage love out of lust? You know, and oftentimes, much of what we're engaged in is a lustful kind of life, love of places and things. Our whole identity is oftentimes based upon the appreciation, our lust. You know, we invest more money externally than we ever invest internally on our soul. And so in law enforcement, AJ, I want to ask you, how do you leverage the whole concept in your program? How do you leverage the whole concept and the essence of love out of people who have been programmed for lust?
Well, you know, I'm glad you asked that, because depending on who you talk with, you know, whether it's a person on the street or a deep philosopher with 6 degrees, love can mean one thing, or love can mean up to 6, 7, or 8 things, right?
That's
There's
right.
6, 7, 8 different kinds of love that are out there. And the kind of love that I'm talking about is the one that we're born with, that agape love, that one that gets kind of scraped away and covered over and weeded out through the years of life experience. And certainly in certain cultures like police culture, it gets weeded out. You're seen as weak if you display a kind of brotherly love that Milo's talking about, right? And Milo's weak. He's nowhere near being weak. I mean, he's one of the strongest men I've ever met, you know? So it's got to become part of the formal training to go back in and teach what love really means, because Omar says it all the time, hurt people hurt people. and you got people who are in the law enforcement community who are hurting, suicide rates, domestic violence, substance abuse, off the charts. Dealing with people in communities who are hurting. And they're going in and spreading that hurt. And so one of the things that we're proposing, and I've been, by the way, pitching this to people in Santa Monica, from the mayor, the city council, the mayor, the garden department, which just got their budget slashed in half. 2 years I've been begging for a 20 by 20 piece of land somewhere in Santa Monica where we can get police and students and elders and returning citizens and everyone who makes up the community to dig in the dirt together and take off the badges and the labels and the titles and dig in the dirt and plant some tomatoes and strawberries and cucumbers. And while you're building a garden, you're building relationships. While you're building a garden, you're tapping into parts of your mind and your heart and your soul that you don't get a chance to when you're anywhere else. When you're in that nature, especially in a city like Santa Monica or Los Angeles, when everything's made of concrete, and you take off your shoes and you get into this soil, and you get on this level of, you don't even have to talk. You just, 6-7 feet apart, weeding, pruning, watering. And there's something that happens when someone does that. The sheriff's department, LA Sheriff's Department, they've got a garden in Compton. They supplied like 10,000 pounds of food to elderly people who were food insecure. Cops and kids grew that food together and grew relationships in the process and blessed community members because of it. My daughter, Sierra, she's 28 years old. She's a teacher, been all over the world. She has agreed to take on our gardening program. She's a vegan. She's trying to get me to stop eating filet mignon. She already got me to stop eating pork, so I might, that might be as far as I go. But she's ready to run that shop. We got people at the Dallas County Community College District committed to planting gardens at all of their colleges. The ones that have gardens, they're going to commit part of that garden to become a love garden for police and community members to maintain it together for the benefit of teaching children gardening skills, so that they can then come up with this skill set that can literally and figuratively feed them for a lifetime, but also bless the community, people that are hurting, right? We got people in the Pennsylvania, in the Philadelphia area. Yaden, PA Chief Chachi, there, he's building a garden right there at the police headquarters. We've got other places, but I've been begging Santa Monica for 2 years to give me just I don't want to own it, just let me use it, 20 by 20, to get police and community members side by side. And I believe that's one of the 3 elements we're asking people to do now is, watch that film, discuss it with the people that you watch it with, read the book, discuss it chapter by chapter through a book club, and then build a garden together and maintain that garden together. It's a metaphor for life, and I believe if we do that, just seeing the results in Compton and other places where it has been done, transformative. I believe we could change the entire culture of police and the entire relationship dynamic between police and community if we just do those things. John, I've been wanting to ask you, man, you deal with young people, you deal with students. Mm-hmm. What's the love dynamic, between the sheriff's department and the students? And what kinds of things are you doing to make it that way?
Yeah, so our officers are constantly engaged in ongoing on-campus dialogues with students on campus. We hold in-class roundtable discussions. Officers will impromptu themselves on a campus. They'll bring pizza. They'll bring various different, maybe snacks, and they'll sit down and they'll have a conversation. Some of the conversations are centered around some of the things that they're seeing on the news or some of the things they're seeing in the community. We're able to get a great understanding and a great back and forth dialogue to understand where they're coming from, some of the things they want to see, and we get to explain some of the things from a law enforcement perspective that maybe they didn't know. It's been very helpful for us. We've had no issues or pushback, but again, it's a constant ongoing dialogue and relationship, and we're moving about from campus to campus. So we have officers assigned to each campus, and those officers are actively engaging with those students on a regular basis to where they know the kid, they know the kid's parents, their grandparents, and so they have this relationship that we wish every police department can have. So when we're out in the community, they're waving at us, they're talking to us, and they're sharing information about what's going on. And I think that's one of the beauty of being involved with campus policing, is that you're able to forge these relationships. And if we can just replicate that, and we're trying to replicate that off the campus as well, it's really it'll really help to turn things around. What we also find too, that sometimes some of our kids that have grown up in a community, they may have not had the experience with the police, but it's what they're being taught at home negatively about the police. And so when we talk to them, we're able to break down some of those stereotypes or preconceived notions or things that they were taught or shared, and get them to really understand that that's not really the way it is. And some of them actually do come around because that's just what they were told by their siblings. Not necessarily always their parent. They could just be about their siblings, from their siblings. So we're able to really engage them in a conversation that really taps into their brain, kind of puts them at ease, and it puts the officer at ease. And then a lot of times what we try to do, because I heard it mentioned earlier about us being in uniform. So a lot of times what we try to do is we try to show up not necessarily in uniform, and say we have a guest speaker that's coming in to talk to you. And for example, I may not be in uniform. There's no badge and gun that they'll see. It's just me having a discussion with them. And they don't find out until the end that I was a police officer. And then it's like, oh, wow, you're so cool. We get to see the human side of the officer, so to speak, without seeing a uniform first. Because sometimes they're automatically turned off because of the uniform that they see. So we use various different tactics based on what we see and what we learn from them. Sometimes it's like, we'd like to just talk to you without your uniform. So we try that in different areas, and it works. And so then now when they see us in uniform, it's a different level of respect and love for each other, so to speak.
One of the other things, and I think maybe, can I ask everybody on the call, can you serve and protect without love? I think let's do some introspective work. Can you truly serve and protect without love?
I'll from my perspective, Mayor, I say no. I mean, we're doing it every day, but you have to love yourself. You have to love what you do. You have to love the community. Love is at the core of everything that we do. And that's why I like the show, the name, because love is if you don't love yourself, how can you love and respect someone else?
Right.
You can't.
Right. Charles, what do you think? Can you?
Well, you got me on that one, Mary, because
yeah, I know.
And I think about, so we have in law enforcement, and you used to be in law enforcement, overtime horrors. Yeah. And so they engineer end of watch costs for the purposes of making money, because they got to pay for that ski-doo, that boat. And so in many respects, they become like paid mercenaries. Yeah. And so it has nothing to do with love. It has to do with their own self-aggrandizement, their need for conspicuous materialism. It's all about them. So externally, it looks like I'm here for you, but really the underlying driving force is their own selfish desires.
But is that serving? Who is that? Self-serving?
It's self-serving, but in the eyes of the constituency, it looks like. But internally, I agree with you. I don't like.
Let's go to that. Let's not go to what people think. Yeah. Because it's what you think, right? And it's why you do it, right?
Correct.
And as John said, you know, you cannot, to me, let me say this. If I don't love you, I don't want to serve you.
Yeah.
Right? If I don't love you, I'm not going to protect you. You know, AJ was talking about protecting his family. You know, he wasn't saying that I'm going to go out and hurt nobody, but if somebody come in to hurt me and my wife, then the love that I have for her requires protection. It requires certain things. You see what I'm saying? That's what I'm saying. That's why. So you know, yes, a self-aggrandizement, the materialism, and all of those things. That's not really real. Well,
see, I'm not tripping off that one. And so I'm going back to the initial, I think it was AJ who talked about, well, in Latin, there are like 7 different types of love, you know, and so it depends on which one are you identifying with.
Right.
And one of those types of love that's talked about is a self-serving, selfish love, where it's agreed upon, you know, how about casual sexual partners outside your marital relationship? And so
you know what I didn't say, which I should have said, I should have, you know, couched it properly. So let me do it with the right kind of caveat.
Okay.
Can you love agape style?
No, you cannot. If you're going to use agape as your baseline, it's all about
so let me, and I think it's important. Can you serve genuinely without agape love?
No, I don't think so, because if you have agape love, you have a conscious competency that exceeds your mind. You know, so we have these 5 senses, but there's another sense. One of the pathways that enabled African Americans, people of color, to survive across centuries is their faith. It's their faith in the ultimate love, the agape love. And it was their faith that allowed us to exceed our circumstances. And we pass that on to our kids. And so, you know, I'm with you in that I think love is part of it. Breathing is part of it too. You know, it's a soulful breath, not a bodily kind of breath. You can lose yourself in your body. So what a tough question, because it's so, you know what, you should have been a philosopher.
I agree.
You're like Socrates, one of those, like Socrates.
He is. Trust me, he is a philosopher. We've had some long conversations. You know, my perspective on that, where I served, I served at a nuclear missile base in Europe, where there weren't supposed to be any nukes. We had 24 ground launch cruise missiles. We were the line of, you know, the last thing you ever wanted to see go into action. And so my role in public affairs was to keep the peace, was to be in the community and deal with the media, and, you know, and just our office. I mean, that's what we did, you know. If we went into battle mode, it was over.
Right.
It was over for everybody.
That's right. Gotcha.
So my perspective is, the last thing you do is resort to violence. Wow. The very last. I was talking to a guy yesterday, 32 years, never drew his weapon. How do you go 32 years without drawing your weapon? And he was, you know, he was a stellar police officer, peace officer. You know, so just, yeah.
Some of that circumstance too, you know, sometimes, you know, circumstance just does not dictate certain things. And there's some, you know, I think it's important in understanding law enforcement is that circumstance sometimes dictate response, that it's not always the officer and their intention. And so, you know, we need to be mindful of the complexities of being in that position as a law enforcement officer, as well as citizens oftentimes, because if you've never worn a badge or carried a gun, then it's hard sometimes to articulate what that's like to people who not had that frame of reference, right? And so just because a person has pulled their weapon or done something does not make them less noble than someone who has not, you see. But I'm saying that your intention in how you deal with the citizens, how you appreciate humanity, is the most important aspect of whatever you do, whether or not it's law enforcement or being an attorney or a doctor or whatever you are. When you do it out of love, you're doing it with your best self. When you talk about the concept of the heart, which is really what this is about, your heart is your best self. That's why people say she sang with all of her heart. He played with all of his heart, which means that your heart is your best self. So love is your best self. And so therefore, every day when you put your uniform on or when you go into your office, you go into the office with your best self, which means you go into the office with your heart.
So when you mention heart, you really mention a level of consciousness, not a physical heart in your chest, correct?
Absolutely.
Yes.
That's
what
I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Level of consciousness, yes.
Yeah.
And so I think that a lot of officers don't really respond well. They react to things because response requires a level of consciousness that reaction doesn't. And so when somebody pushes your button, you're just doing something based off of your value programming versus thoughtful consideration. Thoughtful consideration would have never led that officer to put his knee on the neck of a human being unless he objectified that person as a thing. And the interesting thing about objectification is it allows you to identify that individual as someone other than a human, as something other than human. It's like you have an ant. Well, some of us have ant problems in our house. I mean, do you ever consider the life of an ant? Or do you just wipe it out as though it is without life? Well, it's a life because it's moving. But we don't attribute that level of significance to it. How many of us step on a snail? I ran the hills this morning up at Friendship Park, and I'm looking out for every snail on the road because I don't want to step on those things, right? I know they have a destination. But I'm conscious of that. And
well, if you called me a philosopher, Charles, I think that I'm going to grant you.
I'm just a sophist. Yeah, and so I just think that, for example, one of the issues, how many of you have taken a look at that movie called Waiting for Superman? And it was based upon the school system in Chicago. And it basically talked about the school to prison pipeline. You can very accurately identify the percentage of young Black males in elementary school who are going to end up in prison because the incarceration system is set up like that. So much of law enforcement is set up like that. And Jennifer Eberhardt, with her studies out of Stanford, talking about implicit bias and racial identity. I think that we have enough evidence. In fact, our life is the evidence, but we have enough scientific evidence that we can say, what we're doing is predictable. And so I think that we have to take a look at that heart as a form of consciousness because we all, nobody ever taught me how to, I ran away when I was a kid. Tough circumstances, some of us have those things, right? But nobody ever taught me how to be a parent. That was a real-time experience, and so who taught you how to be a parent? Who taught you how to be a responsible father? Some of that stuff you learned on the way. I remember the first time I arrested we had an investigation downtown L.A., domestic violence call in a high-rise Skid Row hotel. Get up to the 8th floor, little kid would say, "Mom, I got to go to the bathroom." In Skid Row hotels, all the restrooms are at the end of the hall, showers and bathrooms. So I decided to look outside the door. I had to stay with my partner and look down the hall. I saw this kid. He had to go through this gauntlet of guys, all these pedophiles who have been released from LA County jails. They got vouchers to stay in a hotel. And so fast forward 5 years, I saw that same kid walking the streets in Hollywood. I thought to myself, is there something I could have done 5 years earlier if I had the consciousness to prevent that outcome 5 years later? But I was value programmed to take care of my partner, to put some solutions on that situation. And that's why I think we have to take a look at our own consciousness. Pull that, would you ever pull your partner off of somebody who doesn't deserve to have a knee on their neck? So I agree with you that the heart has to be related to in terms of our identity, our humanity, and our relevance. And so I think we have to talk about heart in terms of our consciousness. But then years ago, remember that term zombies? I remember when Chief Williams was in LAPD, they called him a dead man walking, because he didn't have the consciousness of the politics in Los Angeles versus Philadelphia. So we had some people who were real believers in the culture of LAPD who were actively undermining the success of a chief who was loved by the community. And so